You guys are you guys are doing awesome, man. It's really cool to see all the guys that you're getting engaged in these conversations. Well done. I know it's not easy. Hasn't been for me anyway, but you guys are crushing it.
Yeah, it's one of those things you think you know some people, and then you try to produce a podcast every week, and you're like, I really don't know a lot of people, do I?
Yeah, it was interesting. The last guest I had on, or two guests ago, his wife called me a week or so ago and was like, I learned things about my husband in that conversation that I had no idea. I learned so much. I couldn't believe it, which was fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's amazing what conversation will do for you. But well, anyway, man, Jeremy Morse, thanks for coming on. It's great to have you. You have a fantastic beard, by the way, and you look all cozy and warm, and you're sipping something. I think that's something hot. Where are you at? What part of the country are you in? Is it cold there?
I live in, yeah, it's getting cold. I live in Emmett, Idaho, so I'm about an hour north of Boise, Idaho, so western Idaho.
Okay.
I'm about 2 hours from Nevada and about 30 minutes from Oregon.
Wow. Is the expansion of Boise starting to reach you yet?
It is. At 5:00 in the morning, it's just taillights. This has turned into a little bedroom community in the last 3 or 4 years, so it's coming this way. We live in the county, so it's still pretty nice because you can't subdivide less than 5 acres. So there's been no building or anything right where we're at, but it's coming.
Wow. How long have you been living there for?
We moved here 10 and a half years ago from Prescott, Arizona. But I'm originally from southeastern Idaho, so my dad has a ranch about an hour north of here, and I kind of wanted my one son at the time to grow up in that environment and be closer to family. My mom and sister live in Boise and their families, so we decided to move up here. It'll be 11 years in March.
Wow.
Oh, wow. What were you doing in Prescott?
When I did a couple stints there. I moved there probably 20 years ago from Wyoming and got a job managing a ranch for a wealthy guy that his wife was kind of into horses and he was into Ferraris. So they had a lot of money, and I managed their horse program and breeding program. And then ultimately they unfortunately got divorced, and my wife and I took a job in eastern Idaho building a equestrian center for a development, like in lieu of a golf course. This guy wanted to build a equestrian center, so we moved up there and built that and managed it until 2008 when the housing market crashed, and so he just shut the whole thing down. And we moved back to Prescott, and I was shoeing horses and riding colts for the public there. Rented a place that same place I used to manage was for sale, and he let us move back in there. So I opened up shop there and had a nice place, covered arena, and a lot of turnouts and pens. So
wow,
that's what I was doing before we moved back here.
No kidding. And so I know you have the podcast and everything, but what do you do for income, I guess, would be the right question. Is it through the podcast, or are you still working? Or?
Yeah. So 10 years ago, the same time that we moved back to Idaho, to Emmett here, when I was going through my journey, when we moved back to Prescott, you know how it is when you start out in this industry, and to move back somewhere, I'd given all my clients away and been gone for 4 years. So I started over, and this guy wanted me to start, I think, 15 brood mares that were ages 15 to 20 to ride them, because he wanted to sell them all. And they weren't even halter broke. And after about a month of that, of getting run over and mucked out, I was just like, having a little 3-year-old son at the time, I was like, man, I don't know if this is what I want to do again. starting over because I've moved around so much my whole life and getting a little bit older and getting ran off with and crashing through panels on them old brood mares. It was a wreck. And I'll never forget, I was filling water troughs one day, and a guy that I had showed cow horses with called me, that was from Wyoming, said, "Hey, my brother has this company in Pennsylvania in the oil and gas industry, and we're looking for guys, and this is what it pays." And I was going through a bunch of personal stuff, and my wife and I were separated, and it was extremely humbling to take my cowboy hat off and put on a hard hat and go out to the east, which I'd never even been out there. And anyway, I worked in that industry for 3 years and saw an opportunity. So me and a buddy started a company 10 years ago where we invented an attachment that goes on a skid steer and it rolls up pond liner. So that in the oil industry, they use a lot of this thick plastic liner to line ponds and go underneath drilling rigs for containment. And so we wrote a business plan, and I actually went back to that guy I worked for in Prescott and his financial advisor, and they funded our little startup company. And fast forward 10 years and almost being bankrupt 3 times, we have this company. We go all over the country and roll up these pond liners and oftentimes recycle the plastic, which nobody else does. We just found this little niche. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years and building our little cow herd. And my wife and I do a little grass-fed beef business also. And I've started some other companies on the side of that as well. But that's the main answer to your question, I guess, the long version.
No, that's great. That's great because it provides a lot of context, right? And it's kind of ironic I'm asking that question because I did do a little research prior to this. So I listened to, I think it's the most recent podcast you had published where they were talking about, you guys were talking about how conversations with men, the first conversation is, what do you do for a living? And so I was like, well, I'm kind of playing into that trap by asking this, but also, that was a great answer. So that's provides a lot of context for where you're at now. And so with all that, well, I can see Ben wants to ask a question, so I'll let him take it.
Well, I'm just really curious before we roll on. Where did you get the idea to roll up pond liners? Because just before we move on, because that's pretty wild. I would never, hey, let's roll up pond liners.
Well, it started because we had some customers in North Dakota where I was ended up becoming the general manager of that company I went to Pennsylvania for. They transferred me when the oil boom happened in Pennsylvania or North Dakota out there. And part of what we did was install those liners. And I had a customer ask if I could send a crew out to get rid of it because it's real temporary, the usage of it. And I'd send 10 or 12 guys out there with box cutters and a skid steer with forks, and they would fight that stuff in the wind, and it's not pliable at all. It's really thick. And one time we were shorthanded, and my now business partner and I had to go out there and do it. And I was like, this sucks. There's got to be a better way to do it. And they're using so much of it in that industry, and it just seemed like a shame to throw it in the landfill. And the landfills were getting where they didn't want to accept it anymore because it takes up so much airspace in the landfills because it doesn't compact. So we just started brainstorming, and I'd cut little chunks of it up and bring it back to the shop, and I'd melt it and form it into stuff, and just thinking there's got to be a secondary use for this. And so I sent pieces of it all over the North America to recyclers, and they're like, oh yeah, it's highly recyclable. But they couldn't handle the quantity because, there's so much of it. And then I found a recycler in Eastern Pennsylvania that could take it and regrind it and make pellets out of it. And it becomes a new marketable commodity. And then we're like, we got to figure out a way to harvest it. And so we just started drawing up mock things and went to engineers at Caterpillar. Once we got funded and sat in the drawing board, which was just, the whole experience was super crazy. because my whole background has been with horses and cows, and to do something like that that's so off of anything I ever knew. And the business side of it, I've just learned a lot, trial by fire for sure. But that's kind of how we got started. And then it just has grown into this, like I said, little niche market. And we're the only ones that do it. And we do it all over the country and have an amazing crew that goes out and does it. And it's just, in the last year or so has created a lot of freedom to be at home. I'm a high school football coach in the fall, and I have 3 sons and a daughter. And like I said, have a little cow herd, and we raise some horses. And so it's just been a great transition into getting back into what I love to do, but not relying on it to support my family.
Wow. And then did you guys make that attachment just for yourselves, or is that something that you market as well?
No, we've had the opportunity to sell it a lot, but our business model is for us to go do it and deploy our guys into the field. So we've held off on selling any of those, but we get calls often. And we've had some people try to rip us off, and it's, we have our attorney send a cease and desist letter because we patented it and jumped through all the hoops. And so we've been pretty protective of it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's a really cool story, because we've talked to a lot of different people that, that are in the cowboy world, and some of them have been really successful at, being horsemen professionally or ranching. But we've talked to a fair bit of good horsemen and cattlemen who find other ways to make a living. And that's something some of the younger guys don't always think of off the bat. Everyone wants to be a cowboy, but they don't realize that in this economy, in this day and age, maybe you do need to go invent a pond liner roller upper, or whatever you need to do.
Yeah. For me, it was to get the dream that I've had to have my own place. I saw the writing on the wall with riding horses for the public and working for other ranches my whole life, that unless you inherit land, it's really not achievable anymore with the way land prices are. So I was like, how can I fast track my dream? And it's like, if I have to put a decade of my life towards something else to achieve that dream, I just got humble enough to go put myself in a very uncomfortable position, because the culture of the oil field is so foreign to me. It was like they were speaking a different language, right? Just like the cowboy culture would be for somebody that just steps into it. There's all the nuance to it. And I didn't understand any of it. Being screamed and yelled at by 19-year-olds that were my superiors, 20-year-olds, was extremely humbling.
Wow. And how old were you at the beginning of that decade?
I started when I was 40. I'm 51. Yeah, and it was just part of my journey of getting sober and going through tough times in my marriage. And in our cowboy culture, it's so much of our identity is on how good of a horseman we are, a roper, or what we can do for somebody. And to let all that go was very hard and very humbling. To be 40 years old and not have a clue what you were doing, and engulfed in a completely strange culture. And I didn't necessarily like it, but I just stuck with it long enough, and I advanced very quickly in the right time, in the right place, and started putting money away to buy the place I'm at now. I just saved for the 3 years I was in the job before I started this company, and that's how I did it. And now I get to be a fair weather day work guy. I always joke that people text me, especially in the fall, when they're gathering and shipping, like, hey, can you come help us today? And I always say, well, let me check my schedule. And by schedule, I mean, let me look at the weather app and see what the weather's going to be. I'll get right back to you.
Aha. Who's the cowboy now? All right, Joe, I think I'll turn it back over to you. I think I've grilled him enough over the liner company, but that's really cool, man. I just had
Thanks.
those little
Yeah,
details, it's like you never know what you're going to find out about somebody, and it's fascinating. It's so fun to meet new people every week. So,
it's
pardon my
it's
enthusiasm.
no, I love it. I love these questions because I barely graduated from high school, right? And I took a road of using my body my whole life to make a living. And it is hope giving to hear stories. I think I sure have received a lot of hope in hearing guys' stories that kind of reinvented themselves or humbled themselves to advance their family and their dreams. And so I appreciate the questions.
Of course.
Can you talk more about that oil field culture? Because now I'm curious. I, we've talked to a couple people who have kind of been around that world, but like for me, who doesn't know anything about it, what do you feel like the biggest like culture shock would be right away?
I think a lot of it was the hierarchy of it all and the like I mentioned the lingo, the language. Like it was English, but I didn't understand a word of it. But it also is such a weird industry because it's so cyclical and so up and down that I just saw these young men making six figures in their early 20s and driving the jacked up trucks and the motorcycles and all the toys. And then there's a downturn in that economy and all these guys are out of work or a change, and the president changes and that market changes. And to me, it was so eye opening to see how fickle that industry is and how the swing, the pendulum swings in it, and not seeing any of these guys saving any money, thinking like that it's going to last forever. It's a fairly dark. It's people. I often say to me in North Dakota, especially when there was $100 oil, there was people coming from all over the country, and it felt like a modern day California gold rush. I mean, there were people sleeping under bridges and in their cars, and there was no housing, and it seemed like a modern day gold rush. People coming there to strike it rich, and you could make a lot of money in a short amount of time. So it was kind of a mashup of people doing very well and people trying to get there to support their families. And I found it to be kind of sad because so many people came there to make money, and the realities were you had to play the game, and it was who you knew and who sucked up the most. And so I don't know. It was eye opening for sure to see that much money with young people and the drugs and all the stuff that comes along with it.
Right. Yeah. What, like, people are kind of benign until they have the means to do whatever they want. And then, yeah, it's like everything just gets accentuated tenfold, the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's a melting pot for sure. And, since we have operations in West Texas, we don't just work in the oil field, but we work a lot in the oil field. And West Texas is such an old, mature oil field market that people live there and have kids and go to their kids' soccer games. And that was the opposite of North Dakota. Everybody flew in and worked their hitches and flew home. And I found it very refreshing to go to West Texas and see that culture that town was built around it and for it. So it's like there's cowboys and there's people that work in the oil field in West Texas.
Yeah.
And it was a whole different feel than the oil boom in North Dakota, and much more laid back and trustworthy. And the people have been doing it, third, fourth generation oil field workers. And that culture much more resembled the cowboy culture in which I grew up. And it's still a good old boy deal down there and who but I would say there's a lot more honor and respect in West Texas in that oil field for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know the culture, but I have heard that the most profitable cross for a rancher in West Texas is Brahman over oil well.
You're right. You're not wrong.
Yeah,
You are not wrong.
that's the cross that'll make you the most money in West Texas.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, cool. So you said you grew up in Idaho. Um, was it going to be like from an early age? Did you know you were going to kind of cowboy and ride colts for a living and stuff like that when you were done with school? Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I guess not. I don't even know if he can see us.
Sorry, guys. I can't hear you at all.
I think maybe we stop recording
Hello?
and then kick him out. All right, we're back. So, yeah, for a minute there, you couldn't hear me. And I thought I had asked a question. I was like, man, I can't believe that was such a dumb question that I've left our guest speechless.
No, was that good?
Yeah, I thought you were looking and you were like, what? Why would he ask that? You know, so it made me feel better when we had some technical difficulties. But what I was gonna ask you was, growing up, did you always kind of feel like you were destined for the kind of cowboy riding colts for the public type life? Like that was from an early age, or did you have any other thoughts or direction?
No, that was pretty much it. When I was real young, my uncle left home and went to Nevada, and he would come home in between jobs on ranches in Nevada, and I was just enamored my whole life with. And my dad was a cowboy, and I got my first horse like for my third birthday, and my folks separated, and my dad just started taking ranch jobs. So I think till I was in high school, I never went to the same school for 2 years in a row, because in that culture, you're always looking for the perfect outfit, right? And so we moved from Idaho to Montana to California and Oregon, and he just was kind of on that trail of cowboy. And so I grew up in it. And when I was in like junior high, we moved to Oregon, and my dad worked at the ZX, and we only had to go to school 4 days a week. So I would get to trot out with those guys on Fridays and Saturdays. So being in 6th, 7th grade, man, there was nothing cooler than trotting out with the big buckaroo crew on Friday mornings at 4:30 in the morning or whatever. So I kind of always, that's where I was headed for sure. There was a stint in high school where sports were pretty much everything to me, and at that point my dad had bought his own place and was putting together some cows, so I did get to go to all 4 years of high school together. So I grew up, working on the ranch and cabin and feeding. We fed with the team and in eastern Idaho. But yeah, as soon as about halfway through my senior year, I was like, college isn't for me. So I was like trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was starting to ride bucking horses, because there's something interesting that happened when sports is everything to you and you're not going to go to the next level. And then it's like, what am I going to replace that with? And I didn't rodeo through high school. So I took to riding bareback horses, trying to fill that void of what's next after high school sports with rodeo.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I actually had kind of a similar deal, where in high school, sports was defined who I was, but it was like my whole basis for like my social life.
Yep.
Because you had to play sports year round, and it just gave you something to do, gave you like automatic friend group, all that sort of stuff, right?
Exactly.
And then when I realized I wasn't going to have that at the next level, I really got back into horses for the first time since I was probably in 8th grade, to where I was riding consistently. And played polo in college because it was
Oh, dang.
kind of a way to do that again and kind of scratch that itch. Or
Yep.
honestly, looking back at it more, it was more like I didn't realize it, but I needed something to like channel all my energy to. I have a lot. I have a lot of energy. I'm like a blue healer or something. Like if I don't
Need a
have
job.
if I don't have a job or structure, I start tearing up people's slippers like really quickly, you
Yeah.
know. so that was good for me to have that like as I went to college, because every now and then like I'd get hurt or I wouldn't ride wouldn't ride in the real nasty winter months. We were kind of in the off season, and I could see myself like starting to tear slippers up again. And I was like, I need some positive structure in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah.
So,
Same.
and then from there, yeah, you said you kind of bounced around until you realized that maybe that wasn't the, having to rebuild that after being gone. It's not necessarily a formula for being a family man.
Yeah, it suited me well for, 20 years. I also was like kind of just running from my past all the time. And the cowboy lifestyle suited that perfectly because it's part of that culture, right? Is to move a lot in the name of wanting to see new country. And so I would move every 6 months. For what I know now is not the right reasons, right? I was getting in a lot of trouble and my drinking was getting out of hand. So and from relationships, like anytime I'd get in a serious relationship and feel like I was starting to care for someone, it would be time to pull up and roll up my bedroll and head back to either Wyoming or Arizona. I'd go to Arizona in the winter and ride colts and shoe horses in Wickenburg. And then I'd go back to Wyoming in the summers, and it just suited that very well. Kind of being on the run from all the things that I didn't want to deal with or face,
Sure. Do you feel like you were, what'd you say?
I was running from the law a lot too.
Oh, well, that seems like a really good reason to move. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
So during all that, did you feel like you were, I guess, self-aware of why that was happening? Or in the beginning, did you just think, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and it was more just kind of going with your impulses, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, no, initially I just would take seasonal jobs. Like when I first left home out of high school, I went to Jackson Hole and I got a job at a dude ranch because there's a rodeo in Jackson on Wednesdays and Saturday nights. And this dude ranch I heard about paid for your entry fees. And also we would put on a rodeo for the guests on Friday nights and we'd buck out our dude horses. So I was like, what a better job. Plus there's 50 employees and half of them are girls, or more than half of them are girls, that college girls that would, go up to Jackson Hole for the summer. And then I'd stay through the fall and work in hunting camp and learned how to pack mules. And then when fall was over, I went to Arizona and rodeoed for a few winters and lived in Phoenix and did odd jobs and ended up apprenticing for a farrier. Because I hated changing the oil in my pickup. I hated mechanicking. I'm like, man, if I could learn how to shoe horses back then, I'd get $5 a foot. I'm like, man, I could shoe one horse and pay somebody to change my oil, So it made perfect sense to me to learn how to shoe horses. And some of the places that I would work for, you'd have to, you had to know how to shoe your own horses. So I kind of, back to your question, when you take seasonal jobs, I didn't know at the time, but it suited me very well to move every 6-7 months. It wasn't till later until I was like, oh, I see this pattern and it's very unhealthy, the reasons in which I'm moving for. Because it's all my friends started settling down and getting married or getting good year-round gigs, and I was still, 30 and bouncing back and forth between Wyoming and Arizona and working for different horse trainers and, continuing my education in horsemanship and riding with a lot of great hands. But it fueled that desire to move all the time, because I was getting DUIs and scared to death and wouldn't face them. And I'd just leave and not go back to that state, and have bench warrants and all that stuff, just catches up with you over time.
Yeah. There's only so many states, especially in the West.
Well, now they're all connected. So early on, the states didn't talk to each other, and it made it a lot easier to avoid that state. But then the DMVs started communicating with each other, and it'd be hard to renew a license. And so I'd have to go back and deal with stuff. And my first year-round job I got was in Ten Sleep, Wyoming, managing a horse operation for a wealthy guy. Bought a 50,000 acre ranch, 25,000 deeded, and ran a bunch of cows, and built a huge indoor arena and a 5,000 square foot house. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to settle down here. And I'd been working, on my horsemanship over the last decade and got this great opportunity. And it was great. It was wonderful, and blank check to buy horses to build this program. But Ten Sleep, Wyoming's like 105 people. And I lived like 15, 20 miles out of that town in the winters. It gets dark at 4:30, and I couldn't handle the solitude. I just spent every night at the bar, and just going down the wrong path again.
So with these deals, is it kind of over time you decide on maybe making a change, or do you have like an aha moment where you have this self-realization?
Well, I was holding on as long as I could. When I got engaged, I was back in that place in Prescott, Arizona. It was after I left Ten Sleep when I met my now wife, and we got that great opportunity in Driggs, Idaho, to build that equestrian facility. And my wife's like, "You're not going to drink when we get married, right?" And I'm like, "Of course not. What kind of maniac do you think I am?" And sure enough, with the stress of building like a $15 million equestrian facility and all that comes with that, I started drinking for the first time, like by myself a bunch and hiding it. And when that job left and we went back to Arizona, we were not doing well. And so I went back to Wyoming for the summer, and because we separated, and I'd put runs together of sobriety like a couple months here and there and just white knuckle it. And I had some horses I was selling up in Montana, so I hauled them up there, and I was driving through Livingston, and I got pulled over and got a DUI. Thank God I didn't have any horses on. And I was just in such a dark, hopeless place. The next day I got up and was driving back to Jackson because I had a contract to haul some horses, I think to Florida or something, from Wyoming, and was drinking all the way after I'd just gotten a DUI. And I got pulled over going over Teton Pass into Jackson, and I got another DUI.
So what did you get pulled over for? How did they know? Did they know you were drinking and driving?
In Livingston, somebody called it in, and I actually pulled over and got a motel room, and I forgot my wallet, and I went out to get my wallet, and the cops were waiting for me when I went back out to the truck. The next day, when I got my second one, within 48 hours, he pulled me over because I was following a motorcycle too close. He said, "Yeah, you were a little close." And that time they put me in jail, because in Wyoming, you don't get out of jail till you see a judge. And it was like a holiday weekend. So I had to spend like 3 days in there before I could see him. But that to answer your question, that was the that was the moment that, and I've told my story before, but I'd been asking God to take alcoholism from me because I didn't want to drink. It was ruining everything in my life. But I wanted I wanted relief from it so that it would get me out of my circumstances, because my marriage wasn't doing good or my relationships weren't good. And something happened in that jail that night where my prayer wasn't about my circumstances of him taking it from me. It was more about what kind of man I was becoming and what kind of father that I was to my 3-year-old son. And something different in my prayer that night. I felt like there was this exchange of grace, and I felt like God took it from me. I don't know how else to describe it, because I should have went in a detox. I was drinking a handle of vodka every single day and functioning, starting first thing in the morning. And I was so good at it that I knew how to taper it down just at the right time so that I wasn't over the edge and it was obvious and I could just stay numb all day. So I should have gotten really sick in jail, and I didn't. And that was 13 years ago. And I haven't had a drink or inkling since that day. Now, I was in a lot of trouble because I have to add that that was my 4th and 5th DUI total.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a lot of trouble. It was in that week after I saw the judge, I couldn't leave Teton County, Wyoming for a week. I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning and go blow in the sheriff's office. And I became very suicidal because of the mess I had made of my life. For about 6 nights in a row, sober. Because the thing about drinking is, when you're drinking, you're numbing out any of your unprocessed pain. So I never dealt with any of it. But once that was gone and that was taken away, then the totality of the mess I'd made of my life and of my family and everyone who had ever believed in me or given me, the 3rd and 4th chance, was that pain was just raw. And I played Russian roulette for 6 days in a row. I just couldn't imagine a way out of my life amounting to anything or anybody ever believing me. And the man that I'd become for my son and my daughter was unbearable. And the shame of what I'd become. And after the 6th day of doing that, and kind of like bummed when it didn't happen, and the click of the gun, but also the relief was a very disheartening situation to be in, and to have that much self-hatred and be that close to the edge. I just, like I said, I couldn't see any way out. And by the 6th day, I was, I grew up in a very religious upbringing and home, and was at the end of it, obviously, and was reading my Bible, and I read something that gave me hope, and enough to be like, I probably am going to lose my marriage over this and relationship with a lot of people, but I got to do something different in my life, and I got to turn this thing around. And that's been a 13-year journey that I'm very grateful for. And now I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give hope to the hopeless.
Wow. That's heavy, man. That's
and so all that has kind of led to at least part of what you do now with the Wild Courage program and the podcast and there. So I definitely don't have anything like that. Lived a lot less life than you thus far. Hopefully I can get to that point one day, but I think everyone can kind of relate to, especially men, you can relate to having to deal with the like really, like you said, kind of the idea of there's no way out of this situation type feeling. And so obviously that is the absolute extreme end of that. And it's a testament to who you are and who you're trying to become. Like you said, what you've done the last 13 years since then. But when you like, I've heard people talk about that moment before. What's it like what's it like 6 months after that moment, a year after that moment? Did you feel like, obviously you had hope and things weren't, you were kind of like, you had kind of brought yourself off the edge, but it still takes some time to almost like feel like there's momentum behind this
Years.
decision you've made, right?
Years.
Because it's one thing to make the decision, as you're talking about with the sobriety and everything, like, you could get by a couple months and kind of white knuckle it and then something happened. You might be the type of person who has the kind of constitution, you knew things were different, but did you almost feel like you had to prove to yourself that things were different? And maybe that feeling came along later? Because I've been fortunate. I'm not perfect like anyone else, but I have the vices I have struggled with. I haven't gotten to like an addiction level with them. And I think I'm very fortunate with that. But, it does seem to me like, at least in my head, I have to kind of prove to myself that I have some momentum on this. And then, like anything, it gets easier over time, forming a habit or whatever. So can you talk about that? Like kind of the aftermath of that pivotal moment?
Sure. Yeah. My life was such a colossal mess at every level, right? I was broke. And the crazy part is 6 months before that, was managing that equestrian facility. My wife and I were being flown around on Learjets, looking at horses for people, making well over six figures, house. It was all gone that fast. Within 6 months of that stint in Wyoming. So there was a lot of shame as a man and a provider involved in all of that, right? And knowing that how I'd handled things. So the question became for me is, and the question I present to anyone listening to this, of drinking or any coping mechanism is not the issue. It's why was I drinking? Why was I hiding? Why recognizing this pattern of me moving and running my whole life? And that was the invitation. That was the invitation to dig into my own story, to find out why I was living this destructive behavior, because I didn't want to. I didn't want that life. I didn't want to have to anesthetize my pain. And because of all the legal trouble, I had to go to a lot of, AA and counseling and group therapy and per the state of Wyoming. And I'll never forget, I was in Prescott, Arizona with a bunch of 20 somethings in drug counseling. And it's either you go do this counseling or you go to prison, right? So they didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be there. And the counselor started asking these questions. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to have to be here, I'm going to engage in this. And I'm going to listen to what she has to say. And I'm going to start doing the work. And that is where I started getting some traction in understanding why I did the things that I did. And that brought to light a lot of things that I'd been hiding from, which included a lot of sexual abuse and physical abuse as a child, which men are not good at talking about. I never heard anybody talk about it, which never gave me permission, if you will, to just the shame that comes with that, especially in a cowboy culture, right? Like you can't talk about these things. And I just started doing the work. I started going into my own pain and getting some traction there and putting some good hours together, not days, not weeks, to your point, hours together, proving to myself, like maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I can't see it yet, but getting okay with the fact that my wife's probably going to divorce me. I'm probably going to be highly restricted on whether I can see my child or not. But the choice is mine and what I'm going to do with this for the rest of my life. And I just went to work on any and everything that I had to do to get healthier emotionally and mentally. And it was hard. And a lot of it was extremely embarrassing. And a lot of it hurt to get to the real why and the real reasons and start having those conversations. And it's because they're just so filled with shame that you don't want to go back there. You don't want to revisit those things and getting healing in those areas. And that's where I started getting healthy and started making good decisions and putting those hours together. And pretty soon I'd start having days that were good. And that's the momentum that you're kind of talking about, to where I could get a week or two put together, knowing that at the end of the day, no matter what, I knew I wasn't going to drink and that I was going to have to face the mess and the life that I made and own it and not be a victim of my own circumstances that I caused. And for 3.5 years, my wife, she bought a house on her own, moved out and away, and watched me for 3.5 years from a safe distance get better. But I did the work. And that's the invitation that I give to guys all the time of like, yeah, what happened to us sucks. Nobody's parents are perfect. To have grace and compassion for yourself, but then own everything on the other side of our actions that we did because of things that weren't our fault. There's a tension between those two things, right? I got fouled and a lot of things happened to me that shouldn't have, that wasn't my fault. But because of that, I made a lot of destructive decisions in my life that hurt a lot of other people. And so I just went on that journey of finding healing for that little boy in me that was showing up in my full adult grown self and making decisions out of pain and heartache, and then owning the mess I'd made on the flip side of it, and spent a decade trying to make right of those things.
Yeah, it's one of those things, all three of us, I'm sure, are very aware that horsemanship and life have a lot of parallels. But it's kind of one of those deals, like I feel like riding for the public, I have to tell people this a lot, is, it's not necessarily your fault, but it is your responsibility.
That's it.
Yeah. And
that's it.
Oh my gosh, you can, that's, well, you probably know who Jordan Peterson is.
Oh yeah. Love him.
So I haven't gotten it, into his deal a whole bunch, but I do know he has this analogy about burning off dead wood. And I think it's a pretty good analogy, what like working on yourself feels like. And when you tell that to people, it's like, oh my gosh, they get a little scared about how much dead wood they might have to burn off, because all of a sudden they have to be accountable for, whatever it is, your horse or your addiction or why your kid is the way they are, or like, well, all these million things, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, that's always such a tough one. And it's like something you have to keep reminding you, at least for me, I feel like I have to constantly keep reminding myself about that, because it's almost easier. It's like the lizard brain in you can just like lash out and be angry about the situation and not have the, I don't know if you'd call it grace or kind of the presence of mind to be like, okay, well, does that stink? Yes, that stinks. But now I have to I kind of have to respond, as opposed to just have a raw reaction to everything that's happened to me, or everything I've done to myself, which is more so the case usually.
It is. It's, self-inflicted, and there's usually a good reason why we show up the way we do. But that's again the invitation of why, and that's the question I've been asking myself continually for 13 years is, why do I show up the way that I do? Why do I show up this way to my wife? Why do I show up this way to my business partner, my kids, the people in my life, my parents? Why do I feel this way when whatever the case may be, and to take ownership of it, because we only have control over ourselves, right? And we can get really good at training those people around us that we care about most to show up a certain way for us, but that's not safe or healthy for anyone. And so it's just a tension of, what do I need to own and take ownership of, and what can I just have grace for myself that wasn't my fault. That's the journey. And it is parallel to horsemanship, because I was having this conversation the other day with a guy. My horsemanship has changed so dramatically since I've went on this journey. It's unbelievable. My horses feel different, ride different. My dogs respond to me different, because the only way I can describe it is the peace that I have inside now is evident to everyone and every living thing around me. I'm not angry. I'm not scared. I'm not bitter. I'm not mad. I'm not sad anymore. All those emotions that are part of the human experience of life have leveled out. And I have so much peace inside of me that it transfers to, I do so much less with my horses now, and I get along so much better. And there's the proof's in the pudding, right? And so it's been a cool journey in that regard too.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's like obviously you want to get your life and your personal relationships back on track. And then the kind of gravy on the side is becoming a better horseman.
Yeah. Because I'm a better human.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point did you kind of delve into horsemanship more? Were you doing that early on when you were cowboying, or was this after, you kind of came around through some other things?
Well, my uncle worked in Jackson at the Snake River Ranch in the late 70s, early 80s, and that ranch would hire Ray Hunt to come and do like a week with their cowboys every year, which I thought, that's brilliant, knowing what I know now. So I kind of was exposed to Ray, from a very young age, because my uncle would help me start my colts, and he would, put nothing on their head and flag me around and stuff. And then I just was super fortunate to get to work and be around really good hands. And early on in my journey, I got to work for Grant Gallagher, who was a polo guy and he would bring Tom and Ray down to Indio to the polo fields in the winters and spend a bunch of time with them, bringing their philosophies into the polo world. And I worked for him for a few summers and started a lot of colts with him and Mustangs. And I'd ridden with Ray and Brian a few times, and I never rode with Buck in a horsemanship class, but I went to a couple of his roping clinics in my early 20s and was just hooked. and any video or book that Buck did, I'd get my hands on. And I can't tell you how many videos I wore out of VHS tapes. I wore out of Buck, especially his roping videos. So I just got to be around a lot of good guys, and then got in the performance horse world and got to ride with Les Vogt and some of them old school guys a little bit. And on the cow horse side of things, and Ben Balo, who's a great friend of mine, got to show him the reining a little bit and the cutting a little bit. And so I was always wanting to get better. I really like unity amongst my friends. Even back when I was little, I didn't like it when people weren't getting along. And so I always wanted that with animals. And so I was always a student of that and always pursuing horsemanship and knowledge. And so I got to ride with a lot of good hands and work for some really good hands that helped me in my journey. And then just, like reps, like shoeing, just crawling on a bunch of them.
Hey there, On the Move listener. Do you enjoy listening to this podcast? If you've made it this far in the episode, I assume you do. But you never know. I could just be talking to someone's house cat at this point. But if you are there and you like the podcast, the best thing you can do to help support our journey to keep this thing going is to find us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, leave a rating, leave a review, get on social media, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube. The more we can grow this, the easier it's going to become for us to put out episodes every week and get awesome guests so we can learn and stay on the move just like you. Thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like you've gotten around quite a few different disciplines of the horse industry. Where's that left you in terms of what you like to do with your horses now?
Well, now I don't show anymore. My last horse that I showed passed away a few years ago, and mostly when I'd show it, it'd be like at a big loop roping or something that'd have a bridle horse competition, and I would show in those. But now I just like getting my horses solid to go. I go to a lot of Brandons in the spring, which I just love, and bring along slow. And I need a horse that can take some time off because of what I do for a living now. And so just getting them super solid, which is fun. And then I still go to quite a few big loop roping competitions. So they got to be able to handle that. When we met at the Pro-Am, it was the first time the horse that I have now had ever even been in a stall or been inside or anything. So I was pleased that he handled that all pretty well.
Yeah. Well, so you hadn't hauled him anywhere, or how come he hadn't been in the stall?
Well, they're just turned out on pasture at home. And then I did take him to one roping this summer, but I just turned him out in the end of the arena. It wasn't indoors or anything. So he's just my other horse. I've lost a lot of horses in the last few years, but so this horse is just pretty young and green, and I just got him into the bridle this spring at some brandings, and so I just hadn't hauled him anywhere yet until the Pro-Am was the first time, like I said, he had ever been stalled or been inside or seen any of that. So he did really good.
Yeah. Well, you guys looked great. You were a good pair in the roping.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, so moving forward, we've covered a lot of your story, and I know we haven't gone in depth. I've listened to a few of your podcasts as well, and definitely I would recommend anybody listening to this that wants more of that. There's lots more of that over there on your Wild Courage podcast, especially the parts with you. That's pretty cool stuff, and you really do go deep, and you're very open about your story, and so Wild Courage. So you kind of went through all these things. You were talking about being in Arizona, and you're starting to dig into your life and kind of sit with your thoughts and realize you're going to work on it. The world's going to do it, what it's going to do, and your family, your friends, but you've got your priorities. At what point does Wild Courage come into the picture where you started to see that was something that you had to offer to other men, or how did that
Well,
happen?
it just started like probably 4 years ago. Conversations in my office actually with my business partner and our general manager, and we invite guys into that space in our board meeting room. And hey, I noticed something, you seem off today. What's going on at home? What's going on in your marriage? And just having these extremely vulnerable conversations. And the opposite would happen of the secrecy, the shame of whatever we were going through, because it really, the risk in being vulnerable is if somebody really knew me, they probably wouldn't like me. And if they didn't like me, there's probably no way anybody could love me, right? And just finding the opposite of that to be true, of acceptance and no judgment, no condemnation, and how healing that started to be just amongst 3 or 4 of us. And we started inviting some of my outfitter buddies into it and cowboy friends, and like just having real conversations. And there's something about our world and technology and the speed of it is like, what would happen if we took this idea and we sat around a fire and we turned our phones off and we just got real? No bullshit, no pretending. And it just became this place where guys were just opening up and being honest and real about where they were at in life and not posturing anymore. And the thought of the podcast came even before that. I was like, man, I've been hopeless. What would it look like if I just interviewed guys that have been through hell and made it through the other side? And what if that guy's story gave hope to somebody that was going through something and really feels like they're the only ones going through it and nobody would understand? And then to hear somebody that's gone through the exact same things and have the courage to actually say it is extremely hope-giving and powerful, because one, if you hear that, you don't feel alone, and it validates the pain in whatever it is in your life you're going through. And that's very healing just to hear that. And so not knowing what I was doing with technology or at all, it took me like 6 months how to figure out GarageBand to record these on, and just kind of going for it. And guys, and then I've been pretty open about my story, especially, with the drinking and the sexual abuse and stuff. And the messages that I started receiving from not just guys, but cowboys that reached out to me was mind blowing. Like, wow, some of those things happened to me also. And I thought I would take this to my grave. And you're the first person I've ever talked to about this. Thank you. I don't feel so alone. I don't feel so scared. I don't feel so all the things, right? So it just started kind of organically at that. And now that, we've been doing this fire for 3.5 years, twice a month, 3 times a month in my barn. The need for space for men to be authentic and be open, it's just organically turned into this thing. I think we have fires going all over the country, wild courage fires, that guys that have heard about it and are doing it. We have them going in Canada, and I mean, Maine to California, Texas, the Midwest. It's been really humbling that there's such a need for guys to have a place to be open and honest, and to see the healing that's happened. And the emails I knew we were onto something when I started getting messages from guys' wives. Like, my husband is not the same. I don't know what's going on, but thank you for what you guys are doing. Was been very validating to this mission and cause, and the outpouring of support in the cowboy community has been overwhelming. how it's landing with guys.
Wow. So how do you go about doing that? If you're setting up, you're talking about it, and in my mind, it's almost like I'm picturing you're starting your own, I know you're not trying to start, like, what's the, gosh, I can't think of it right now, but it comes from the Knights Templar, the Mason.
Yeah.
It's like you're starting the Masonic Lodge, but I know you're not. But, like you're starting a club. So how do you go about doing that? Because you obviously started one at your place. So as other people are having like a chapter almost, starting a fire in their area, do you go there and meet with them? Or is there kind of a process they go through in order to get that from you? Or do they just start it up and then call you up and say, hey, Jeremy, this is awesome. We're going to do it here. And like, thanks for the idea.
Both. I've been getting like some random emails of guys with a picture of their fire and 6 or 8 guys like in Arkansas and Canada and all North Dakota, all over. And then there's guys that reach out, how do I want to go about this? So we've kind of started getting organized. We're a nonprofit. Because we have some big dreams and visions of getting help for guys. So we have guys reach out to us, and we call them fire starter trainings. We've had like weekend retreats where we've had guys fly from all over the country to Boise, Idaho, and come to my barn, rent the one little motel, rent all the rooms in town, put guys up, and just come share with them what we've learned in holding that space and that tension of rejoicing with guys that just got a promotion or just got engaged or getting married or having their first child, and the tension of 2 guys later, the guy's wife just left him, or they had another miscarriage, or whatever it is. I speak pretty broadly because it's pretty sacred ground that we don't share what goes on there, but there's something beautiful that happens in that tension of being able to be where you are no matter what. Because a lot of times when somebody's doing really good, we shut down and don't want to say, that's awesome for you, but this is going on in my life. So we've learned a lot. We've done like 180 of these fires. So we've got a lot of reps in and holding space for guys to feel heard and seen and all the things. So yeah, we're putting together right now some video training actually on if you want to be host a fire. My partner in this, one of them, Brian, he's done a bunch of videos that we're editing and putting together right now to train guys on how to start fires. And again, it just happened organically. We didn't put it out there or anything, but guys that have listened to the podcast are like, man, I really need this in my community. And so, yeah, it's just popping off like crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's so wonderful. But yeah, I could see how you would want to get organized, because you know how it is. Things could be taken out of context, or as you grow, which I'm sure you're going to grow. I mean, wildly. That's, so earlier when you were talking, you do such a good job painting a picture of, especially in the cowboy culture, that lifestyle that's kind of pushed, or that, I think guys think they want that, right? They want to be like Peter Pan. They want to just be able to escape. And, I've been in Georgia for 3 years, and there's not sorry guys, but there's not a ton of cowboys in Georgia, so you can't really use the cowboy culture excuse down here. But I found, outside of Joe and a few other guys, most of my friends don't ride horses, and they're not cowboys. And so I can't speak for like the cowboy world, but it does certainly seem, even if you look in the history books from, the 1800s and on, these guys all had nicknames, and it's almost like their nicknames it was like they were naming their pet, sins almost. That was their nickname would come from their downfalls, and they could just get up and go to the next city. And then eventually you'd be like, the song Big Iron, you're just the next casualty in Dodge City getting gunned down. And so their life was pretty short. They didn't have to worry about it. Then as we've come into the modern age, listening to your story, it's like maybe if you were in the 1800s, you would have just got gunned down at a young age or middle age, or, I mean, 40 was probably old back then anyway.
I would have.
Yeah. So it's like, that's like the modern day, that's the modern day cowboy, but it's kind of a sad story. And the cowboy lifestyle often kind of praises the guy who has all these quirks, and we give him a buy, because, well, he's just a cowboy. He's that way. And people do the same thing with different men in all classifications, which is why it's so great. This is for men all over. It's not just cowboys, obviously, but we kind of like to praise guys who are different and quirky and have these downfalls, but it doesn't help them at all. And it's not good for their families or any of the rest of us either. But just, that's what I was going to ask you is, like, do you think that if you hadn't got married or hadn't even had close relationships and really leaned into like the escape lifestyle and maybe picked up a few more hobbies that you could travel and do seasonally, and like, would your life would it have kept on going without hitting kind of a brick wall? Or I just wonder, like, do some people never have to face that? Do you think you would have been one of them if their lifestyle just allowed them to keep escaping and doing something new, and the right things came along and it kept being fun? And it wasn't until they were like 75 that they were like, man, I'm glad no one ever knew me that well, because I would have been a really crappy person to know. I would have been cool. I would have been like everybody's, I would have been Peter Pan, or I would have been that Clint Eastwood character walking around with a serape riding a donkey. Like, you would have been this cool looking guy, but to know that guy and live with that guy, or to be that guy, would be hell.
Yeah, I think that if it would have been motorcycles, the end result would have been the same. I'm extremely grateful that I took it to that extreme and that I made it through it. To your point, I see so many old, crippled cowboys that have nothing. Right? They went through a couple of marriages. Now they're alone. And the thing that they gave their whole life to, they're too crippled to do. And it chewed them up and spit them out. And because of the avoidance and the running, they got nothing. And that's part of this mission, is like, man, if we can catch these guys in their 20s, 30s, and let them know that, hey, it's all right. You've been through some stuff. You don't need to go get a camp job, because once you're too old to work for the big crew, that's the evolution of the cowboy, which is more solitude and alone. We weren't built to be alone. We're built for community and to be in relationships. And the healthier that we can get, the better odds that we won't die alone and old and crippled. And that breaks my heart to see. But I just see it all around me. Is whatever happened to that guy, Good Time Charlie, that was super fun at the Brandons or on a big crew. And hey, I also want to say that if you can handle your alcohol and you can go whoop it up and have a good time and it doesn't affect and ruin your life, good for you. That's awesome. So I'm not speaking to those guys, but the guys that struggle like I did, the path only leads one way. And that's the reason behind Wild Courage. Is I'm tired of my friends drinking themselves to death or killing themselves. And it's happening too often, too much in our cowboy culture. And at large, right? Because Wild Courage just isn't for cowboys. It's just, I really love this community. It's given me so much and so many good friends. But I'm tired of watching them perish and end up alone or dead. And so I've had to get over my insecurities of being bold and vulnerable in this space, because it's different in a fire with 8 or 10 guys than to put it on these different mediums. But I got over that quickly, because this isn't about me. This is about the hopeless man.
Yeah. Well, that's why I brought that up, because, listening to you guys talking, it's making me think about my own life, and how that's why I mentioned being down here in Georgia. I mean, I know they have their own problems here, but for me, it was kind of it put me in an environment where I thought the people were different than who I was trying to be. And, that's been a wall for me that I've kind of slammed into, where it's like, okay, that's great. You wanted to go be some freelance cowboy and do whatever the hell you want. But like, life goes on, and there's more important things in the world. And people that listen to this podcast know my story a little bit anyway, but, gosh, some days I kind of feel like a guy holding onto the hood of a speeding car, like in one of those movies, and
Right.
it's swerving back and forth, and you're determined. You're like, I know I'm going to stay on it, but it's tough, because some days I see how, and they're good things, but like the good things that I've decided to start pointing my life towards, that part of me, like I'm with Joe. Like, I don't feel like I have certain addictions. But you know what? If I'm honest with myself, I certainly do have vices, and you, Jeremy, we all do, right? You would know better than anybody that you might not have an alcohol problem, but you might have an anger problem, or you might have, just
It's
the
all
list
relative.
could go on. Yeah. And so I have all those things. I might not have something everyone sees, but I have stuff. I know what I have. And so the good things that I've decided to start putting in my life, all that other junk, it's like just making me swerve all over the place some days, because I'm trying to lose it. And it's like, okay, I got to chuck that off. I've got to get rid of that. And because it doesn't fit with who I'm trying to be. And it's this constant realization that, like, man, I'm glad I'm not, well, sometimes I wish I still was aiming towards kind of the drifting, aimless pick up and go somewhere else lifestyle, but it just doesn't look rewarding. And then talking to people further down the road like yourself, that often confirms that. But yeah, it's something that it does make me sit with myself, and just because I don't have some obvious thing like alcoholism, I'm not exempt one bit. I've got a lot of stuff that I've got to lose in order to go on to what's more important. And I'm sure in any walk of life it's the same, but for me, horses are important, the horsemanship is important. But if I had like a list of the things in my life that I need to be working on, that's not at the top. And for a lot of, probably the past 6 to 7 years, that has been at the top. And it hasn't been until the last year or so that's not the top of my list. And that's a tough thing to let go of, because you want the identity in that so bad. And for some people, maybe it's a bad thing they're letting go of. So it's not an identity thing. Maybe it's just a comfort, a secret comfort, or a secret escape. But I think for me, in many ways, I feel it in that form. It's like identities. And I'm like, gosh, no, I want that. And it's like, no, you don't want that, because it's going to drag you down. It's taking you away from what really should be at the top of your list, and all that other stuff will come, and
That's very
but you
true.
paint such a great picture of that. And I think that's awesome what you're doing. Because we need so much of that. And also, you hear about how, the problem with families in America, and kids, and things going off the rails, is fathers not being in the home. But like, how much more important? Well, it's just as important, not just for the kids that a father's there, but it's important for the father to be there. It seems like the kids need him, but the father needs his family. That's what I'm hearing from you. And that men need responsibility. It's not like, well, those kids need a father. It's like, no, well, the father needs the kids too, because without those kids, then he can be that Peter Pan character. But with the responsibility, then he's got a choice, and then, hopefully he can get help and grow. But they need that responsibility. I need that responsibility. And those things that seem hard, like I said, like the things that I want in my life, but just as I start to realize the weight of that decision, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because I need that. If it feels like I'm having to lose something else that I've been carrying along, so be it. So
that's it. That's, you get it. The thing that we're really trying to do in the big picture is, what if one guy can deal and get help and healing in his unprocessed pain? Because I see a lot of good men out there who have laid down their sword, and they're not contending for their wife. They're not contending to be a dad. They're just going through the motions and numbing out to whatever it is, porn, work, becoming a better horseman, whatever their escapism is. If we can get them to engage in this journey and to deal with their unprocessed pain, because to your point, it shows up somewhere. And it's usually, the brunt of it shows up relationally in how we treat ourselves or how we treat others. And if that one guy can get healthy enough to go and model to his kids what it looks like to contend for his wife's heart, what a message he's showing his sons, and what a message he's showing his daughters. Don't accept anything less than how you see me pursue your mom daily. Because you're right, the prisons are full of fatherless men. And if we can get dads to engage in their journey so that they can get healthy and better, that's how we can change the planet. Literally, I know that sounds like a big thing to say, but I think that's how we can turn things around. It's not by voting, as we all know, but it looks like family. Healthy kids leaving the nest and going and duplicating that. Because at some point when you get to my age, the conversations my friends and I have, and I still have young boys at home, is got to be about our grandchildren, right? It's got to be about, what are we putting our hands to today that's going to affect the next generation? And I don't know personally what we could do that's more important than this conversation and the journey that you guys are embarking on as young men and figuring these things out. Because man, it's the legacy piece of, what am I, it's what is my ceiling? It's got to be my children's floor, right? So that by the next generation, they're not coping and dealing with all the crap that I've had to go through. And I think that's how we can change our society, is by one man saying yes to a hard journey of self-discovery and getting healing in the areas in which he's not showing up for as a man and a father and a husband. So that's our big goal.
That's all.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And the coolest way, the coolest thing that we're, oh, sorry.
Well,
Go ahead.
and just before you go on too far, I want to clarify, like, I don't feel perfect in any way. I don't even feel like I've figured much out at all. But the one thing I have confidence in is that I have hope, and I'm realizing, and listening to you even reaffirms that the idea of changing the world, or maybe that's even heavy for some people. They might be a cynic, kind of like me, and go, yeah, good luck with that. But don't you want to have hope at least? So if you're going to be a cynic, great, have hope above that. And in a very small practical way, Joe and I are always, we do these podcasts, and I feel like sometimes we do get to the point where it's like, well, if you just do this, this, and this, it'll work out. Like, what's wrong with you guys? And it's not like that. It's not easy like that. And I don't think it's not easy for us at all either. But just because it's so hard doesn't mean that you can't put hope a little higher than the difficulty. Because otherwise, hope doesn't look that exciting and life just sucks. And so either way, I know there's people listening who could go, well, that guy doesn't know anything. He doesn't have it all figured out. And they would be right. They would be absolutely right. However, I have hope, and that means that I can hold that above all the difficulty. The difficulty is going to come 100%, but I can still have hope that I can overcome that. And like that little parable, the guy who falls down, if he gets up one more time, then he falls down. I mean, he's a winner every time.
Yep.
No one said he didn't fall down. So I just wanted to clarify that because, yeah, I'm humbled by this, and I'm humbled to get to learn this stuff at a younger age. And maybe that's just preparation. Like Ray used to say, don't, be prepared for anything. You've probably heard it from his own mouth, but it was something like, be prepared for anything, and then you're ready for anything, kind of thing. But I would say prepare anytime in life that you can. If your ears are open, your mind's switched on, and you hear something good, put it in the bank and prepare. And hard times are coming eventually anyway, but you should still have hope above, all that difficulty.
Yeah, that's it. That's so good. It is. I don't have much figured out. I do have a few things that I'm striving towards. We talk about all the time in Wild Courage is we don't care what you do. We care about who you're becoming, because it's just like horsemanship. You never arrive. That perfect bridle horse is always going to be leaning into that one circle with that shoulder a little bit. There's always maintenance. There's always more, right? There's always, you just never arrive at this thing in life. And I certainly don't want to ever come across as like I've got it figured out, because I certainly don't. But I think humility has a lot to do with it, and being curious about what's possible. Yeah, it sounds crazy to want to change the world. Well, it starts with me changing my own family, right? And me being able to model a marriage that almost didn't make it, and give hope to those that are going through a hard time in their marriage. And like you said, if you get knocked down, you just keep getting up. And that's all I've ever done my whole life. It's not because I'm super smart or super gifted or talented at anything, but I just have never given up. And that's where the hope comes from, is, man, if we could see it modeled to us in a healthy manner, what is possible? What can we accomplish with our horses, with our dogs, more importantly, with our spouses, our children, or someday, And so I understand people, and especially in our culture, the cowboy culture, but the vulnerability and all of this. And like I said, I had to get over that really quick, because I know there's guys out there, they're like, oh, your feelings and emotions, that's for women. And I don't know. I've just seen a lot of good come from it. And I've seen a lot of guys get better. And it all started seeing it in my own story, and diving into things that I didn't want to deal with. And it's scary, and I get it, but just don't give up.
Yeah. You got to just learn to love the process, right? It's like Ben said with the hope. The way I look at it is your execution, if it's like you want to get, improve yourself, however that's going to be, I'm going to end this addiction. I'm going to try to be this person for my relationships, whatever it is. You like the ability to do it isn't near as important, at least initially, as one kind of having like a target, like, because that's the other thing too. And I imagine these conversations, especially people who get into it at the very beginning, like people might even have a hard time articulating who they want. Like, okay, yeah, I'm here because I want to change. Okay, well, what do you want to change into? Who do you want to be? And that can be really hard for people initially to kind of have a grasp on that. So it's like you need to kind of have that, and you also need to have it. You need to know that it's within the realm of possibility to get there one day. Even though you might not ever be perfect and align with that 100%, you need to, it's like going to a horse clinic. You need to know that, okay, that's what I'm trying to accomplish. And I need to know that it is within my realm of capability to actually get that done one day. It might not happen today. It might not happen a year from now, but I can do that one day. And to me, those two things were and are exceptionally hard for me to like keep at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
So like I went to school for engineering, so I'm very much like I guess I have that kind of problem solving mindset, and I'm very preoccupied with how do you do this, how do you do it? And it's almost frustrating to me because it's like an imperfect problem. You can't just like be done and you're like, you know what, today I became a good person.
Yeah.
And so tomorrow I'm gonna
Messy.
like build the shed outside or whatever. Like I'm checking it off
Yeah.
the to-do list. So that's kind of how I've had to look at it, and I think Ben did a good job touching on that. Is that hope is kind of, at least for me, made up of having a target and then understanding that it is possible to reach that target one day, even if you don't get there anytime soon.
Yeah, that's very true. One of my mentors, when I was first starting to learn how to show, said, show your horse for where he's at today, not for where you hope him to be in the future. And I find that applicable to what we're talking about right now, is like to have a vision for where you want to go in your life and the things that you want to accomplish. But part of that, what that says to me is like, have grace for yourself in today, in getting there, because it all is such a long process that I think men, and then you throw cowboys, horsemen on top of that, we put so much pressure on ourselves, right, in comparison, that it's like, man, I'm not even close to where I want to be. So it's that grace piece is so important to have for yourself in the journey, because otherwise the comparison and the disappointment and the expectation that we put on ourselves in our walk in life and in our horsemanship, we just beat the hell out of ourselves so bad. And I see so many guys do that, and I'm like, whoa, wait, stop. And it's important to have men in our lives to look back and go, look where you came from in the last 6 months or year. And it's important to recognize that, because we get so caught up in the vision and the goals sometimes that we forget how far we've come. And again, it's just important to have that grace for ourselves in today. And like, yeah, I'm not where I want to be, but man, I have come a long way. And I see men miss that step often.
Yeah. I know I am very, very guilty of that. Cause like I said, I get so target focused, but to me, if you do have that ability, it's almost, like what we were talking about earlier, you kind of like recognize the momentum you've built for yourself. I like when I first got around Buck and all the horsemanship things, I kind of had like a honeymoon period. And then there was like this,
Yep.
oh my gosh, this is insurmountable.
Big mountain.
This is like not even possible. Like there's so many days where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to sell this horse and go get a set of golf clubs or something. Like put me out of my misery. And now I'm definitely not where I want to be, but it's almost like I've done it enough and gotten a little bit enough of a momentum to going forward that I've like proven to myself that progress is possible. And so I do, if I'm being honest, I think I'm better about not being so hard on myself about that. It's like, oh, if I want to do this, like maybe 2 years from now, I'll be able to do that, and I'm not so worried about why can't I do this right now? And you kind of settle into that journey. Same thing as like you're talking about, learning to be vulnerable, learning to burn off that dead wood. It's almost like the very beginning is like the hardest part. It's like you start trying to push the rock and it's like way harder to get the rock moving than after it's moving. Then you're like, okay, well, I still have to take the rock like 20 miles, but at least it's moving now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Momentum's important, and reps. It's just like, when I was learning to shoe horses, it was like the most physically demanding, scary, high stakes thing you could do. And then I tell young shoers all the time, you just got to crawl under a bunch of them, just like starting colts and riding colts. It comes from reps and doing it over and over and over again, and not crucifying yourself when you don't get it right. Back to the grace piece of like, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and like Joe just said about proving to yourself, that it is possible. And something lately I keep getting reminded of is to compare myself to where I've been, not to all these other people. Might even be good people that I want to be like. And
Yep.
And I think that for me at least is lately where like having a spirit of thankfulness is starting to come a little bit above the spirit of doubt and just dissatisfaction and in this vacuum of always wanting what's ahead and like really, and again, I'm not great at this, but I'm trying to put it in my day early. Like when I wake up in the morning, like I like to think I get up early and I like to think I like getting up early, but frankly, I don't really know if there's anyone who really does. Right. But when your alarm goes off, if you're like a human that gets good sleep, your first thought could easily be, gosh, I really, you might even be happy, but you're like, I would love a few more minutes of sleep. Right. Yep. And I've really been trying when that alarm clock goes off to be like, yes, I'm so thankful that thing just went off and how big of a difference that can make in your whole day. And then 5 minutes later, you might have some terrible thought or you step out the door and yell at the first guy you see. But hey, it's progress to at least hear that alarm and not be like, where's that stupid phone and want to throw it? And instead be like, oh, that's great. I'm so happy to be alive. And that's been really hard for me to even like think about. And then the first few times I would start getting kind of ticked looking for the snooze button and be like, no, I'm supposed to be happy about this. And actually like this morning was one of the first mornings where it rang and I was like, hey, this is great. I'm up. And then I've had a few bad moments since then today, but to me, that's like a real physical way of putting that right at the top. And I've never thought about that like most of my life. And that's huge. That's gotta be huge because you just started your day off. Like you only get so many interactions in a day. So if you're going to kind of abuse the first few interactions you have, you're already behind. So if that first one is positive, there's a win. And then you might lose the rest of them, but at least you got one and you got it first. So that's been a small way I've been kind of implementing that.
That's really good. And it speaks to Joe's point about momentum is the narrative that we have of ourself. And how do we think about ourselves? And starting the morning with gratitude is the best way to start a day. And it's easy for me because I wake up next to my wife every morning. And that almost didn't happen. So I always tell guys, like, there's beauty all around us. There's always something to be grateful for. And that does, again, to Joe's point, it can change the momentum of our day. And those days can turn into weeks because we experience life so circumstantially that we're always bent based on our circumstances. And what if we become so healthy inside and our narrative of ourself is so healthy, humble, but good and positive and fruitful that our circumstances don't crush us anymore. And that's what I've been striving for the last decade anyway, is like, man, I just get washed away by my circumstances so easily. And to get those to where life happens, circumstances come and go. People have died in my life close to me, experienced a lot of heartache, but I noticed that I'm not being thrown around, tossed like the waves of the sea when circumstances change because I've done so much work on me personally. And it all starts with exactly what you guys are talking about, of getting a little momentum in the right way and waking up. I often drive home from wherever I'm at and get emotional that I'm driving home to what I'm driving home to. in just that state of gratitude of like, I can't believe that I have this incredible woman that I get to do my life with. And I have these 3 sons that I'm shaping and molding and messing up every day, and have grace for myself for that. And a daughter who I've been reunited with and get to spend time with, and that I get to do this business with my best friend, and I get to do Wild Courage and have these little jagged cows and these horses. And like, man, that doesn't mean life's great because I'm 51 and turning gray. It just means that my circumstances don't define me anymore like they used to. And I'm the only one that can do that.
Yeah.
Personal sovereignty.
Yeah. Man. Well, I don't know about you, Ben, but I feel like that message right there is probably a good place to wrap it up, because that really put a bow on everything, Jeremy. You've done this a time or two, haven't you?
I don't know. I've sat around a lot of fires with men and talked about things in life that really matter. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool, man. Well, you know, I'm really glad Ben was able to catch up with you, because I knew who you were a little bit through the podcast. But man, it's been really cool to learn about your program here and learn about your life and kind of how you got to where you were. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, man. And I hope people out there. So what's the best way to find out about Wild Courage and the podcast and your other programs? If people are out here listening and they've heard about you from the first time through us, what should they do next?
Well, the podcast is on all the usual suspects, Apple and Spotify and all those. We have a website, thewildcourage.life. And we do retreats. Like we have a retreat coming up this weekend up in Idaho where we have guys flying in from all over the country in Canada to spend 3 days in the woods at a cabin and do some work and listen to their stories and really get to sit in with them in their journey and their story and encourage and hopefully give them some tools to take home with them. And then, so that's really the main ways. I think we have we're on social media, The Wild Courage on Instagram and Facebook and what have you. So yeah, we're just trying to give hope. And I just want to say thanks to you, Ben and Joe, for having me on. This has been one of my favorite conversations I've got to have, and what you guys are doing. I applaud you guys for taking on what you guys are doing and getting some great guests on. Man, you guys inspire me to take risks and getting people on. So thank you. And Joe, I look forward to meeting you in person someday. And Ben, it was great to meet you at the Pro-Am, and thanks for letting us borrow your wheelbarrow to clean our pens.
Oh, yeah, anytime. We try to be prepared. But
yeah,
definitely, Jeremy,
we weren't.
Awesome talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.